Hi, in today's video I'd like to explore the catharsis theory, the idea that it makes sense to let people get things out of their system, to vent, to release stuff, to express your inner rage. And of course I'm only talking here in relation to those situations where you are faced with danger. Often it does seem as though the person that we're confronted by is bubbling over with rage, and somehow maybe the idea is that if we can allow them to let off some of that steam, their behaviour may become more manageable. It kind of seems inconsistent to some extent, the frustration aggression hypothesis put about by Dollard and colleagues in 1939. Their idea was simply that any level of frustration can lead on to aggression. Later on in 1969, Berkowitz extended this to suggest that any unpleasant experience can lead to aggression. Indeed, this kind of aggression is called reactive aggression. So let's have a look and see what we can make of this. Imagine that you're driving along in your car and you're on your way to an important meeting, an interview for a job that you really want. And as you're driving along, the traffic slows down. You start looking at your watch. It comes to a halt. It's not moving. You take a few deep breaths and then you think, all right, it'll move, don't get too worried about it, and it doesn't move. Before you know it, you're beginning to sort of pound your fists, you're pulling at yourself, you're swearing under your breath, you're heaving, and we can see the aggression building very rapidly because of this frustration. The question we have to ask ourselves is, was all that pounding of the fist, was all that swearing under your breath, was all that heaving actually getting anything out of your system? Was it making you any less aggressive? I would suggest not. Many years ago I used to work in the mental health unit. It was a residential unit and it was for young people who were experiencing trouble in their lives. The trouble was their families, with their behaviour, with their peers, with life in general. And our job was somehow to help them through these troubles. The person I want to talk to you about is a young man I'll call Joe, and he was 17 years old. The first encounter he would come across as quite intimidating. But the truth was that despite this kind of outward persona, Joe was just a frightened little boy who was way out of his depth, who couldn't get the world to work the way he needed the world to work for him. His dream was not of violence and destruction and being a bad person, despite the outward persona. For him, heaven on this earth would be nothing more complicated than the possibility that he could go home with his parents, his father sitting on one side, his mother sitting on the other side, together, and watching EastEnders without them all ripping each other apart. But it just wasn't happening. His parents had difficulties too, and this made it difficult for them to respond to Joe's needs. But as Joe's needs weren't being met, his behaviour got worse, and this made the parents feel that they couldn't cope with it, and it became a vicious cycle until we got to this particular point. We eventually managed to get them all together and agree that if Joe was to generally work on his behaviour and improve his behaviour, that his mother and father would give him the chance to come back home and prove himself. And thankfully the parents agreed to this. Over the next few weeks, Joe really applied himself. His parents agreed to have him home for the bank holiday weekend. His behaviour had improved. He had tried really hard. But the day before he was supposed to go home for the bank holiday weekend, his mother rings me and says, "I'm sorry, Ian, to drop this on you at the last moment, but we're having some friends around for the bank holiday weekend, and it wouldn't really do to have Joe around because he would get jealous and he would start acting out and it would set him back, and he's made such good progress in the unit to have him back and then set everything back for just one ill-timed visit. It really makes no kind of sense, Ian. I'm sure Yeah, another weekend we will have him back, but please tell him that we do love him, but not this weekend. I'm saying, Mrs. Jones, please have your son back. He's kept to his part of the bargain. You should keep to yours. If these are your friends, they'll understand that your son is more important than their visit. They can visit any time. Joe can only visit this one time. For him, it's his life. For them, it's just a social exchange. Please, Mrs. Jones, have him back. And she says, it's too late now, and it's all been decided, but you explain these things so much better than I do. And the phone goes down. So I go to Joe and I say, Joe, what? Joe, your mother's just been on the phone and she says that she loves you and she'd really love to have you home for a weekend. Unfortunately, it's not going to be this weekend, another weekend. And he says, so, why are you saying sorry for that? I don't care. Why would I care? It means nothing to me. If they don't want me home, I don't want to be there. It's boring anyway. They just watch the television all day long and it does my bloody head in. I'm better off here where I can play snooker and be on my Xbox. That's great stuff. Thank you, Ian. So I say, I really am sorry, Joe. And then he goes into his room and he starts trashing the place. I remember standing outside with my colleagues just saying, just let him trash the place. That's awful. Why would his mum do that to him? And we believed implicitly in the catharsis theory. Let him get it out of his system. Let him release his frustrations. Don't constrain him anymore. If he wants to scream and howl it, just let him scream and howl it. And what do you think happened next? Do you think he calmed down, came out and said, well, Ian, I'm glad I got that out of my system? No, it got worse and worse. It got so bad we could no longer stay outside and allow him to vent. We had to go and send the heavy crew in there to jump on him, pull him out, physically hurt him. And yet there was no emotional or psychological gain for him. There was no emotional psychological release. Now it's interesting that when I reflect on this, at the time when I and my colleagues were standing outside of this room listening to Joe explode inside the room, we all felt we were the good guys. We were the people who were allowing him to express this frustration, to break the shackles, to release himself, not to feel constrained by other people, to say what's on his mind, to get it out. But in the end, all we did was we made it worse, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. For many years, the lead researchers in the field of catharsis theory have been Bushman and Anderson, and they have conducted numerous studies in this field. They've looked at how watching violence affects people's own violence. They've looked at how expressing one's own anger and aggression affects one's own anger and aggression. And they have come unequivocally to one conclusion, and that is that we should not talk about the catharsis theory, but the catharsis fallacy. Not only does catharsis not work, it works in the opposite direction to the one that we wish it to. Now I have to be clear here, because some of you will be therapists or counsellors, will sit with people who are struggling with their own emotional world and encouraging them to express that emotion. That's fine, because that's at a very low level of expressed emotion. The trouble is that as that level of expressed emotion goes up, as their arousal increases, their capacity to think, to problem solve and articulate become severely impaired, to the point at which they can do none of those things. And then they are in crisis. And when they're in a crisis and they can do nothing about it, they do the only thing they can do about it. And that is to lash out, to do something to change the situation, to stop this intolerable experience from continuing any longer. So, in a sense, allowing a person to vent makes things much worse. This is not the path we should be following. Take care. I guess this could become quite confusing, because in our previous video I was suggesting there could be a problem with the idea that we should try to remain calm. In this video, I'm suggesting there could be a problem about encouraging other people to express their anger or aggression. It may feel that the options available to us are beginning to close in on us, and that we're somehow caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, and that may well be the truth of the matter. But we need to know how to safely, simply and securely navigate that path. And that is the purpose of this whole series of videos. So bear with me. Until our next video, take care and stay safe.